Welcome, welcome.
Hi, Dr.
Hi, how are
Samantha.
you?
Dr. Samantha Hiew, thank you for being here.
Oh, thanks for having me.
It's delightful. So so first of all, guys, this is our first time meeting. Can we call you Sam? Is that
Yeah,
okay?
yeah, of
All right.
course.
Sam in person or pseudo person. And Sam, we have people here from literally all over the globe and all ages and stages.
Hmm.
And and I loved the topic that you proposed to talk about. So we're going to talk about your thoughts about ADHD are key to managing it. So mindset, what a powerfully important way to start off and kick off the summit. Before we do, I'd love for you to introduce yourself through your lens to our audience and let them know what your passion is about supporting people with ADHD and what brings you here for
Thank you
that.
so much. Thanks, Elaine, and thanks, Diane, for having me. Such a great summit. I've heard of it, and so glad to be able to come this time. I founded ADHD Girls at the age of 40 because I was diagnosed later in life and swiftly founded that company to really try and figure out what happened to me and what happened to us as a collective, and it was also motivated by my
Hmm.
intention to support my own daughter with ADHD, who was really only 6 at the time. And so, like, our journey has completely changed since I was diagnosed and then she was diagnosed as well. And it's sort of helped our relationship, although there was some rockiness that accompanied that. So, there was a lot of learning along the way. And I think we are in such a better place today because of that knowledge. And also knowing what it is, and with my own background in science, because I was working as a scientist until I left the lab at the age of 30 and then swiftly went into 16 different industries. And so my own um, training as a scientist made me look into what caused ADHD. And also, really, it's not just ADHD that we're dealing with. There's so many of us have a strong co-occurring, with autism as well as many neurodiverse conditions. So understanding the root causes of our neurotype, our neurodivergence, really helps in knowing, how to deal with, what, we've been given, as opposed to
Yeah.
hand we've been given.
Well, it's funny, your story, it parallels mine in a lot of ways. I was also diagnosed just after 40. Back, it was like my whole life made sense. And I called my mom and I said, "Hey, mom, guess what we've got?" And I looked at and part of the reason for me, I have three kids, all with varying degrees of neurodiversity. And at some point, I looked at my husband and I said, "You can't be responsible for all of this neurospiciness. There's got to be something else going on." And that clarity that it gives you, and what we say to parents all the time is congratulations. Because once you know what you're dealing with, then you can begin to manage it. But when you don't know, it really it can create all kinds of stories in your head that aren't helpful.
No, definitely, definitely. No, I think, as with everything in life, I think knowledge, will be the first step to really knowing what you're dealing with. And I know so part of my work is, to humanize neurodiversity and ADHD and to really understand the impact of the life that we've had, on how we present. And so it's never just ADHD. It's also like what happened in your childhood. What was the protective experience? What was the experience that was difficult? So ultimately, it's more of a balance, really, in terms of what happens.
Well, and what's coming up for me is that there's two layers here. It's this sort of how do you as a parent, whether if you're a neurodiverse parent, it's like what are the stories you tell yourself about your own challenges? And then how do you look at your child's challenges? And then there's this other layer, which is how do our kids see themselves in this? And how do we help create an environment to have them, and I don't know how to say this, have them have a healthy view of their challenges, because a lot of times these kids end up in shame and blame and all kinds of um, difficult places about their own neurodiversity.
Yeah, absolutely. So you have really hit the nail on the head here because it's not really just about saying to your child, okay, you have a Ferrari brain with bicycle brakes. And it's a great analogy, but you also need to really believe it because you have lived with neurodivergence and you have to model that, understanding to your child as well. So obviously the best thing to do is to, provide a positive example of, people who have thrived with ADHD in what conditions and motivate them to, follow their interests and be free to express themselves. And they won't always feel free, but there'll be situations where they can think for themselves, am I being challenged here? Am I, rightly being told to, just be a good boy or girl and not say anything, because I think that was our experiences, that was certainly my experience, as a girl growing up, not being prepared for the world and always feeling like, I constantly didn't get the memo for what to do. Because I was also born with auditory processing challenges. So in a large class size of 35 people, I would never really understand what is being said, even though I understand English. It's just I can't hear it, when people are so noisy. And so, for me to then grow up as a woman, who kind of partly believe that I can do anything, but also partly believe that I've had to mask and be someone else and have had self-esteem challenges, because of this. And to work on myself to be able to then, motivate and be that positive role model for my daughter and actually encourage her to express herself while she is also telling me what she thinks to something that she doesn't agree with me doing. So it
Right.
is really interesting challenge, like, but a really great one for you to learn as a parent as well. And for me, my children are my biggest lessons and my biggest loves.
Yeah, for sure. And I think that's, again, Diane and my story is that's why we're here, is because when we first started this all those years ago, there was a lot of support out there for kids and there wasn't a lot for parents. And what we know, what the research has shown, is that when the parents get the support they need, they can show up for their kids in the way their kids need them to show up. They can help them understand themselves well enough so that they can learn to manage themselves or want to learn to manage them, right? So you chose the topic of your thoughts about ADHD are key to managing it. What was motivating you in that topic?
Well, basically, as a woman, I am more prone to mind wandering and the negative loop. Research has shown that women are more prone to that. Women with ADHD are more prone to that compared to men with ADHD. And we are traditionally thought to be like more inattentive, anxious with mental health, stuff. And then men are more like kind of hyperactive, impulsive, with a whole bunch of things, right? But then as a woman, for me, the thoughts that are being circulated about ADHD, in clinical journals, in history has been really difficult for me to consume as a person, navigating this journey. And every talk that I give to the community has been centered around reframing what this means for us based on lived experience, because I would much prefer that people who write these publications really try and understand the balance between, lived experience and science and all that. Because a very simple example is, say, pathological demand avoidance, which the autistic ADHDers tend to have. Um, if someone's reframed it as persistent drive for autonomy.
Desire for autonomy, right?
Yeah, and I love that because as someone who has PDA myself, I have grown up with this anxiety of being told to do things that actually doesn't make me feel good. And I don't know if I can even do it, but it's always expected in every time, every school or family, they said you should do this and there's no question asked. And, as an ADHDer, you want a level of control with what you encounter in the world. Because the new research has shown that the ADHD brain, the autistic ADHD brain, is both rigid as well as chaotic, and they only did that research in kids. So, and for me, understanding that if you can reframe your own situation, with ADHD, living with ADHD, it will also help you navigate it better because nothing really ever, never, and anything good really comes from negative thinking,
Mhm.
except maybe like preparing for the future. And that could be reframed as a positive. But, to paint a condition as a disorder is really not helpful for a
Well,
community.
and if you add to that, Sam, we talk all the time about the fact that the science and the medicine don't always time up with each other, right? It's just sort of, it takes what, 20 some
17 years.
years from
17.
something to be identified. I don't know what, I mean, I heard 27. So whatever it is, it's a long time to get
Mm.
from the time that a challenge is identified or a condition is identified to when it ends up like in the DSM or in the mainstream in terms of the language that they're using. And if you think about the words that we've used for ADHD over history, and it, even ADHD is not very, I mean, people start just saying ADHD instead of the words that are behind ADHD because it's
It's not
harsh and it's
positive.
not pleasant. And I mean, I think that this is the challenge, is that we've inherited the science from the history, and we don't want to Pollyanna it, but we also want to embrace it.
Yeah, absolutely. I think there is a shift though in terms of what people are requesting, to be researched, that we also, try and look at it from a balanced perspective. I think because the neurodiverse community has been so, strong in the last few years since the pandemic. So many of us being diagnosed later in life, and many of us are actually people who hold positions in universities, hospitals, clinical, academics, positions. So there is definitely that request, to balance the conversation a little bit. But as a biologist, I truly understand that it is never Pollyanna, like you say, it's not just a social model, right? It's also the medical model. It's how we bring that together, because ADHD is a highly heritable condition, and there are really known genetic, links, and causes. And the life that we've had can activate those, and impact how genes are expressed and cause the challenges that we see. And so many neurodivergence, we have an innate deficiencies in certain micronutrients and macronutrients that, I think really for parents who are navigating, trying to support their children with ADHD, that's the first place that could really make a difference in terms of how they present in the morning, and their energy levels throughout the day, right? So like
Yeah.
simple supplementations, which like zinc, vitamin B complex, omega-3, but there are so much more because it's such an interesting field with so much knowledge now, that you can have in your fingertips.
So it's really interesting that you're bringing this up because when I first started, my joke and the truth is that I'm a nutrition school dropout
Mm,
because before I became a coach, because in my family dynamic, the first major change that happened in our family was, to your point, was nutritional. And whether it was going gluten free 20 years ago before it was a thing, or methylated B12, or there were all these things that we did metabolically to support my complex kids. And they made a big difference. And they weren't a panacea, and it didn't end it all, but it reduced a lot of the inflammation, it reduced a lot of the stress so that we could begin to manage the issues. And and I think, and at that time I had a very forward-thinking nutritionist who said, in those days you could only diagnose ADHD or autism. You couldn't diagnose both,
mm,
right?
yeah.
And so we kind of borrowed from autism and treated ADHD. And and so there is a metabolic thing that we need to address as parents of complex kids. There is something going on in their bodies, and if their body's in a constant state of irritation, it's really hard to help their brains focus on math or doing the dishes or whatever it is we're asking of them. And
Oh,
that's, I think, what I hear you speaking to.
yeah, absolutely. I love that. It is like, and also, it's so interesting to have children where you can see so obviously that if you just give them something that is actually not good for them and how their behavior immediately changes. You give them ultra processed food and like an hour later they are having a crash, an energy crash, and you wonder what happened? What did I do? And then you just trace by, oh right, that was white flour or something that could cause their energy levels to immediately crash because so many of us neurodivergence, we also have insulin resistance. And what you mentioned about the energy metabolism, the MTHFR, MTHFR. I won't say what that stands
I'm
for.
just going to let you do the science. I'm a nutrition school dropout. I
No,
did really
but
well in school though. So
oh, no, like it's a joke actually because in one of my community talks, someone told me what they rename into HFR, and it is a swear word, so I won't say it here.
Okay.
Yeah, so it definitely makes a
So
difference.
there's the metabolic and the neurologic, and we've been talking a little bit about the metabolic. And we're not going to do a great deal of that in this summit, but I appreciate you kind of setting the stage with we have to think about what's going on in our kids' bodies and their brains, and they're connected. And so whether that's a metabolic deficiency or whether they're hangry and
Yeah.
need more sleep or food, paying attention to what's happening in their bodies is part of managing their brains.
We call that activating the brain.
Right?
Mm, yes.
And then there's the neurologic piece. And so the other thing I think I heard you saying was that it's how we think about it. It's whether we see it as a pathology or as a deficiency or whether we see it as a condition to be managed is going to change how we manage it.
Mhm.
I think that's what I heard you saying. Will you speak to that a little bit more?
Yeah, so I think there's a yin and a yang and a balance to everything. What people see are challenges, in the right environment and the right interaction at school or, at home, it can be a real strength. So I know Dr. Hallowell talks about how impulsivity can be reframed as creativity, spontaneous thoughts,
Yeah,
kind of pops into your brain and can, create innovative new art or creation that is extraordinary. So my point is that you can turn any negatives into a positives. But what matters more is that we have a supportive network for that to happen. Because I was pretty much a lost cause in school until the age of 16 when I was in the thick of puberty and then not really understanding why I was just like having brain fog all the time at that age and sleep issues. And it wasn't until my biology teacher told me that she saw something in me and she said, you got to give yourself a chance. And there's
Mm,
something inside me that just kind of woke up, like, wasn't I not giving myself a chance? But actually, the truth was, I was already about to give up, and I was like, okay, I'm just going to leave the school and work in like a job that really didn't really light me up. But then from then on, I developed such an intense love for biology. And so happens also that biology really just helps us understand the process of how life happens. And so that was so, kind of suitable for my neurotype that I went all out in it. And I kind of made her promises. I said, I'm going to get a PhD, I'm going to do cancer research, and I'm going to make a difference. And before that, and she was the only person who believed in me. Before that, I was like, no, I don't know what I was going to do in my life. I was going to be a nobody, and that's fine. And I just think children, encounter so many people in their lives who can either put them down or lift them up. And we have that in school or in, our homes. That can change the course of our entire lives. Uh,
indeed.
that is what I
There's
mean
some, there's some
about.
research on this that I learned at a conference a lot of years ago, the research on resilience. And what it shows is that resilience is a stronger indicator of lifetime success than intelligence. And then when they looked into what was resilience, what fostered resilience, it was if a child had one adult in their life who believed in them, And that's really the example you're setting forth with this biology teacher was someone who believed in you even when you weren't yet ready to believe in yourself.
Yeah, because
Well,
you
and
don't see it, do you?
yeah, no, I was just going to say and then as you added that in, Elaine, I'm thinking about the distinction because a lot of these kids have challenging behaviors, and so we don't want to say, oh, let's turn everything into a strength, and look at, yes, you can turn everything into a strength, and a lot of these behaviors are frustrating, and it doesn't mean you have to be, positive about everything in your kids' world, but it does mean that you need to believe in them and to support them in identifying what's working, what's not working, and
What's
helping them
possible?
what's possible. Yeah. And so I just want to, we threw a bunch of people potentially into a shame cycle because they're frustrated with their kids. And I don't want to do that because a lot of these behaviors are hard to deal with as parents.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, completely. And it is a really tough conversation to be had, to be honest. And also with every child that's being diagnosed, one of the strategy that they, dish out is parental support and education, right?
Yeah.
Because they don't really put the onus on the child to have their behaviors completely turn around by themselves. But then they do give the kids medication. You also need to know how to support that. But knowing how their day to day, is like, what kind of messages, are being said to them. And I'm not saying this, I'm not for 1 minute, putting the responsibility all on the parents, but having gone through things like that myself and having the same challenges, of being to be regulated at the same time that my son or my
Right.
daughter been regulated, it is completely difficult. I'm not saying that it is easy at all, but I think with every rupture though, like I always try and repair it, and then try and understand like how do we move forward from here. And I want you to understand my intention, and that sometimes it doesn't always align with my action because maybe sometimes I am also dysregulated.
Yeah.
Being
Yeah. Yeah.
honest.
I really appreciate you sharing that. And because we're new to each other and you don't yet know a lot about what we do. And everything you've spoken to in this last piece is really very much what we're about at Impact Parents, which is supporting parents and understanding what's going on and learning how to self-regulate ourselves so that we can be present to support our kids as we help them learn to self-regulate and manage themselves. And and the thing about managing ADHD, folks, is that it's not something we do once and then we're done. ADHD is a chronic medical condition that we live with across our lives and that we learn to manage and that we manage differently over time as we grow and change and as our kids grow and change, right?
Well, and the other thing I would add to that, Elaine, because somebody, and we aren't going to go into a big conversation about medication, but there's the other piece of this is that there's this, I think it's misinformation that's out there that medication is the be all end all. And if my kid is on medication, then my kid will be fine. And I think that that's doing parents a disservice because what do they say? Pills don't teach
Skills
skills.
don't teach skill.
These kids have executive function challenges that, yes, if medication works for you and your kid, then that might help your child to focus more, but it's not going to help them with some of these other challenges of
Not going
executive
to organize their
function.
backpack.
No, it's not.
I think someone wrote in the comments like a question about sleep. How how do we do with sleep when the child only sleep for 4 hours? Like they try chart,
It's so
meditation,
hard.
the music and visualization. But I think we go back to biology here, because really there is a definitely fundamental thing that you can do nutritionally, maybe the gut as well that can change that. Because we have that one of the pathways that's impacted in ADHD is this what is that the what is the sleep hormone called? Melatonin, right? So melatonin, serotonin, and then glycine, and the 5-HT. These sort of stuff, the nutritional stuff that is impacted in that, and you could go to a naturopath to have a look, and check that out, and see if they can give you something natural for your child, and see if that makes a difference.
I will say that we do have a conversation about sleep with Dr. Funke Afolabi Brown on Thursday, where we'll be specifically speaking about sleep. So we have about 5 minutes left. First, I want to ask you to let people know we've got all of Dr. Hiew's bio, her gift, all of that is in at Summit Central. Is there any particular place you want to direct people to find out more? I know you do specific work about ADHD in girls, and I got something fascinating from you that you're doing some research around sound processing. So is there anything in particular you
Right.
want to kind of shout out while you're here?
Yeah, so yeah, that research for sound processing that's with my client in Logitech, because I do a lot of neurodiversity training as well in companies, and they just asked for my support for that. But what I am focusing more this half a year is on community talks for women with autistic and ADHD presentations who are struggling perhaps to get diagnosed, and then also trying to figure out what to do afterwards. And mainly, women in their 30s, 40s, and 50s where hormonal impact, has made an appearance. Also, I'm going to launch a trainer program,
Beautiful.
really, yeah, it's just based on that live experience research to hopefully inform clinical practice. So the ADHD and women's event that I'm holding in April, that's going to be also available on live stream. So, please do sign up if you
I was
want.
going to say, give us some information. We'll put it in the notes for you and
Yeah,
absolutely be delighted to share it. I'm a member of, and actually speaking in a couple of weeks to the women's special interest group at AppSard. So maybe we'll do some follow up and share some resources and help you get the
great.
word
Amazing. Thank you. Yeah, that's
out.
on our website, ADHD Girls.
Yeah, beautiful. ADHD girls. So
I was just going to say, so as we wrap up, is there anything that we haven't talked about that you want to make sure that we cover before we end our time with you, or something you want to reiterate that we talked about earlier?
I think really for me, we've covered the very surface, of this because we had like 25 minutes. And really this is a topic that I'm sure we can talk about for hours and hours. And for me, I've written a book that will be published this year, and it's called Tip of the ADHD Iceberg, and it will
beautiful.
go on the surface of our ADHD experience to really go into the human aspect, of what the impact in the life that we've had, really walk people through what exactly causes ADHD. I am a bit of a geek in terms of that. I've been obsessed about that for a long time now. And yeah, it's great to be able to put that all together.
Awesome. Thank you.
We will look for that, and maybe once you've got the book out, you can come back and join us on the podcast, and we will share it with the community.
Great. Thank you. Thanks so much.
It's a pleasure. I want to thank you for the work you're doing in the world. We haven't met yet, and I found you because, there are a lot of people out there on social media these days, and some are kind of in their lane, and some are really bringing the science and the construct and very comprehensive information to the world. And so that's how I found you. So I really want to acknowledge what you're doing, and thank you for joining us and bringing it to our community.
Oh, thank you so much, Elaine and Diane. Amazing work that you're doing with so many people you're supporting. It's amazing. Sub Summit. Really have a great one. Thanks for being, for letting me be the first speaker.
Awesome.
Truly a pleasure.
Thanks
All
for
right, our
bringing
guest, everybody, has been Dr. Samantha Hiew, and with a special interest in ADHD in girls, does a lot of work around ADHD education. And I do encourage you to go check out our bio. We'll add some extra links. If you'll send them to our team, we will make sure to add all of that to your information on the Summit page. And thank you again for being here.
Thank you so much. Have a great one. See you
Yeah,
later.
you too.
Yes.
Take care.
Awesome.
So this is when we get to talk about the person who was just here. This is
You don't mean
so
to say that, like, did she leave? Can we
I
talk
love
about it?
no, look, if you have something nice to say about someone, come sit next to me. That's
Yeah,
my way
exactly.
of being in the world. But what we want to do with every session in this summit is to give you a chance to process what you're taking away from it so that you can use it in your life. Because if you wait till the end of the day to think about what you just thought about, you're going to lose most of what you got from the day, right?
Yeah.
So where do you want to start before we do the
Well,
fun?
so it's because I know I want to give people a chance to process while we're talking, but so go ahead and let's follow up on what you just asked. It's like, what's one aha that you want to remember from the conversation with Dr. Samantha? And then Elaine and I can talk a little bit about our ahas um, as we go through. So go ahead and capture that while you're listening to us, but take a minute and share an aha in the
It's your
chat.
insight, your takeaway, your awareness. What are you clear about now that you may not have been clear about half an hour ago?
Yeah. Um, so do you want to jump in?
Now give them a minute to process. Capture it in the chat, or if you're keeping notes, capture it in your notes, wherever you keep notes. But give yourself a minute to really think about it. So Anna's saying nutritional deficiencies may be something to look into. She mentioned melatonin. One of the other things research has shown is that magnesium is often deficient in people with ADHD, and magnesium can really help with sleep as well. So that's another area. Fish oil is another supplement that's been proven to make a difference, or omega-3s. Somebody's asking, are there resources about best nutritional practices? There are people who do that. We don't have anybody specifically in the summit this week. You can go to our website at impactparents.com. There are over 800 articles, blogs, hundreds from experts. There's an expert named Kelly Dorfman who has written several blogs on or articles on our site, and she's got some resources. There are actually half a dozen articles on the site about nutritional issues around ADHD. So if you type in nutrition, you'll be able to search for that. What else are you seeing? Mine and my son's need for autonomy. Yeah, we talk about that a lot. Believing in your child and help turning negatives into positives where necessary. I want to say something about that. What do you want to
Yeah, I
say?
was going to say, I wanted to say something about that as well. Go ahead.
Well, so what I would say is yes, the yes and to that is you want to help them turn negatives into positives, but you don't want to do the but. You want to acknowledge what the negative feeling or experience is first. Help them feel seen and heard. I get that you feel that way. I see that that's hard for you. Before you say, and this is what I see. This is what I see as possible for you. Because if you want to be careful not to negate their feeling by helping them move to the positive. What were you
Yeah,
going to
no,
say?
and I was going to amplify that. I mean, I think that a lot of times, particularly our kids will use language. They're like, oh, I hate myself. I'm so terrible. I'm such a loser. And our immediate reaction is like, oh, don't say that. Don't, it's like this, we want to erase it because it's so painful to listen to our kids using that kind of language about themselves. And when we do where they are, and a lot of times it creates an environment where our kids don't trust us because in that moment, they feel pretty crappy and they feel like they've screwed up. And so that even though our intention is to help them create a safe space, what we end up doing is they don't believe us because they're not in a place where they can yet believe us. So what we have to do is to meet them where they are, help them to get to a calm moment, help them to regulate through what's a big emotion around a failure or whatever else, and then get to and I believe in you, and look at all these great things that you can do, because it's gonna serve them more in the long run. And ultimately, that's what we want to do, is we want to help them feel better about themselves.
The language that I often use around that is that I believe in you and I know you can do it. And I know you may not see that for yourself right now, and that's okay. Because I see it and I'm going to hold it for you till you're able to believe it for yourself. Because sometimes they need that acknowledgement, but to still know that we believe. Sarah's saying that there are a lot of people in the chat saying nutrition. Sarah's saying, I've done that for myself, but never thought about doing it for my teenager. Here's the caution. If you go home and you start saying, okay, I want you to go do this, um, you're going to be in a control game. So stay the course with the conversations we're going to have this week. Learn the coach approach to kind of build the trust and invite them to whatever change you want to do from here. Remember that they are separate, independent beings, and we want to help foster their autonomy and their agency.
Well, and just to add to that, because somebody put something in the Q&A about how do I get my how do I get my teenager to fill in the blank? And I think this one was either about nutrition or sleep. And it's very hard to make somebody eat differently or to make someone sleep. It's especially hard to make somebody sleep because
Yeah.
most of us have a hard time making ourselves sleep or even understand the priority of sleep. And the biggest tools can be just sharing and modeling and not coming from a place of control, but coming from a place of invitation. Because when something's your agenda and not yet theirs, it comes out as a power struggle. And it comes out as mom or dad are trying to tell me what to do. And especially if you've got teens or young adults, that's not often a place where change happens.
Yeah. So I want to do a little level setting. So we've asked you to identify what your insights are. We want to ask you next to identify what's one action you might want to take based on that insight. Is there one step you might want to commit to? There are a lot of questions in the chat. We're not going to get to all of them after every session. Diane and I are going to kind of try to figure out how to answer what we can on the fly. If there's something we need to direct in a different direction, we will. What do you look like you're going to say something, Diane?
No, go ahead.
Okay. But as we go through the debrief, you've captured your insights. What's one action you want to commit to from here? Just one. And if you make a commitment, how do you want to set yourself up for success with that action? I often say it's kind of like you can join a gym, but that doesn't mean you're going to use the gym. So I want you to commit to what you want to commit to, and then how will you help yourself be accountable? So London's saying to us, remember to pull down to everyone in the chat. London's saying, listen to my kid. So what might help you remember to do that? Is there a piece of jewelry you might touch when your kid is talking to you to help you remember?
Somebody said, regulate my emotions first. Absolutely. The key
Beautiful.
is that we are not able to listen to our kids if we're upset and dysregulated. We just that part of our brain isn't engaged in the same way.
Right. And Ashley's saying learning to self-regulate to be able to calmly help my son regulate. We do a lot of work with that at Impact. Trying to remember to validate feelings first. Beautiful. If you have learned nothing else from this whole week and you leave learning how to acknowledge your kid, acknowledge their experience or their feelings first, then I will consider it a win. Ask my daughter and hear her out before coming full force with what she needs to do. Beautiful. So again, how will you set yourself up for success? How will you remember that in that moment when you want to say, yeah, I think you should, right? What will help you get there? I have a fidget ring. I love that. Yeah, I use my ring as a structure a lot to help me remember things. Ellen saying, watch my body, my son's body language.
Yeah. It's our body tells us so much and we get so disconnected.
I said we forget to listen.
We do. Well, or we get disconnected because our mind goes so fast, and so we hear our mind before we can even notice what our body says. You know, my mind, it's like the quintessential example is like, am I hungry or not? My brain says, well, it's noon, I must be hungry. And like, I don't know whether my body's actually hungry yet.
Yeah, I'm on ADD meds. My body says it's 3, I might be hungry.
Right.
Palin's saying, commit to try not to go straight to yelling, but commit to riding out my son's storms as his anchor. That is a beautiful observation. Just really want to acknowledge how hard that is and how important it is. Yeah. Okay. We are not going to have, this is the only time of the day at the beginning of each day that we have 2 sessions back to back without a break. There'll be breaks all the rest of the day. So I'm going to go ahead and launch a poll here now.
Yeah.
So we can find out who's here. And I'm going to encourage everybody, we're going to take about 5 minutes. If you need a bio break, now is the time to take advantage of it. If you want to capture your thoughts, chat in the chat. We can, do you want to look through the questions while we've got about 5 minutes, Diane, before Dulce joins us? Our next conversation is going to be with Dulce Torres, who's a dear friend of mine. I was served on the CHAD board with her many years ago. We're going to talk about treatment from the lens of what's medication, what's coaching, what's doctors, like whose role is what, therapists, etc.
Yeah. And so Margot's just asked, how do I go about starting a conversation and connecting with my son where I'm not coming from a fix it mentality? Does it start with me and my mindset? Absolutely. And just saying that out loud and knowing that that's the place to start is to recognize that the way I'm looking at this situation, or the fact that I'm overwhelmed and frustrated or scared or whatever it is that's putting you into fix it mentality, can help you to get to a place where, okay, wait, this is something I want to connect around. This is something, and it's not one conversation. It's a million little conversations.
I want to tackle a couple of questions while we're, waiting. Somebody asked, why are there so many kids being diagnosed? And this is one of my favorite questions to get asked. So here's my answer to that. I think there are several things going on. One, particularly now, is that COVID raised a lot of awareness. People saw their kids at home in different ways than they had before, and they began to see where their kids were struggling. I also think that the digital world has made it harder for people to self-regulate. There's so much coming at us all the time. And, 50 years ago, we didn't have to process this much stuff, this much information. And ADHD in particular is a condition that is diagnosed when it becomes an impairment, when it becomes a challenge to function in the world, in your life. So if I were, maybe out working on the farm all day and I wasn't expected to do some of the things, I might not be diagnosed with ADHD. Whereas if I'm living here and expected to perform in a urban or school environment, I am being diagnosed. So it's diagnosed when it becomes a problem for someone. And so I think in this digital world, we're seeing more diagnosis, in part because we understand it better. We're seeing it more, and because the world's a little harder to navigate than it was 30, 40 years ago.
Well, and the definition has changed. I mean, when you think about, Elaine, when you and I were kids, ADHD was something that only happened in little boys when they were moving a million miles an hour. And, Dr. Sam was talking about ADHD in women. Women weren't diagnosed. Adults were, it was, I can't remember what year it was, Lane, you might remember. In order to be diagnosed with ADHD, it was only for people up to age 17, and you didn't get diagnosed if you were an adult. And there were a lot of adults who were never identified as kids because there was a lot of history, that about ADHD. And it was, I mean, there's so much to why it wasn't diagnosed before, I think is an important part of the equation, as much as is why is it getting more diagnosed now.
There's some other things to tie in. There's a podcast episode with Kelly Pickens on our podcast, on the Parenting with Impact podcast, about literally a smear campaign that was launched against ADHD in the late 90s, early aughts, where they went after school systems and doctors. And there was a real campaign, a multi-million-dollar campaign launched to try to discredit ADHD as a condition. And it worked. And we're still dealing with the stigma from that 30 years later, so 20, 30 years later. So I think that is another component that plays into this larger dynamic. And I mean, Sarah Solden didn't write her book on women and ADHD until 1991. So girls didn't have ADHD.
Yeah.
Until 1991, effectively. I mean, that's not true, but that's what it was. That's what the medical community, and there's still people in the medical community who don't believe it exists, who really don't recognize that this is a true neurobiological condition. So there's a lot of context around it.
So I'm going to go ahead and end the poll. Thank you. Oh, we just wanted to see kind of what the age groups were. We see a lot of 6 to 11. The next age group is 12 to 17, so a lot of school age kids, and then some preschoolish, and then a handful of you who have young adults and adult age kids.
Here are the results. And we know that this will change as we change throughout the course of the summit, that as different guests show up, different people will show up. And so we'll probably do this again at another time and see how it's adapted.